Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Farmers Weekly's Woodland Creation webinar. I'm Susie Horn, Farmers Weekly's business editor. I grew up on farms in East and North Yorkshire, where my brothers are arable and sheep farmers. Thank you for joining the webinar, and to our panel. We've got a lot of expertise on the panel tonight, so I'm sure you're going to hear lots of useful advice. And we're going to hear mainly about woodland creation and putting down roots, which is DEFRA's campaign highlighting the grants and the free advice that's available to help meet government tree planting targets. We've had a lot of interest in this session and a lot of advanced questions, so we're going to cover a lot of ground. We'll get to as many questions as we can, and I'll introduce the panel first. They're each going to speak very briefly about their work and the opportunities that provides, and then we'll get into questions and some discussion. So first of all, we have Vincent Headley-Lewis, who is both owner and tenant farmer. He's based at Birkholme Manor, 450-odd hectare farm, 2 miles south of Colsterworth in Lincolnshire. Vincent worked as an accountant mainly with agricultural businesses for much of his career, moved to take over the family farm when his father passed. Since then, he's continued to build on the family's work, planting woodland to benefit nature and to enhance the value of the farm. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Anna Brown, who's Director of Forest Services with the Forestry Commission. Anna's worked in forestry for about 30 years with a particular focus on plant health. She took on her current role in July 2022 in the part of the Forestry Commission that's responsible for incentivising, regulating and providing expertise to help expand, protect and improve and connect England's woodlands. Seb Tai is next, Field Manager, Woodland Creation with the Forestry Commission for the East and East Midlands region. He's been with the Commission for 11 years, starting as a ranger when he worked on community woodlands around Sherwood. And his colleague Rob Cleaver will also be talking to us today. He's Forestry Creation Manager for the National Forest Company. Rob's mainly worked in forest management in central and southern Scotland before this, moving in 2022 to the Midlands to join the National Forest team, which I'm sure he'll tell you more about. So we'll hear briefly from each of them about their work and the issues they'd like to highlight for landowners and farmers tonight. After that, I'll bring Vincent back in to talk a bit more about his experience of creating woodland, and then we'll go into the questions. If you're watching and you want to put a question into the panel during the session, you can do that at any time. There's a box at the foot of your screen. You type in your question there and I'll direct them to the panel. And I should make clear that tonight we're looking at schemes and grants and advice for England only. I'm sorry, we have had a few questions in from Wales. Perhaps we can organise another webinar to deal with those, but it is just England tonight. Please make use of the expertise on the panel and we'll get to as many questions as we can. The webinar is due to last about an hour and a quarter. And it is being recorded, so if you've registered, you'll get an email to let you know when the recording's available. So we'll go straight to our first panellist, which is Vincent Headley-Lewis, farmer from Lincolnshire. Vincent, over to you.
Yes, Susie, thank you. I've been farming the farm for, well, really since I first got as a partner in 1963, but really took on when my father died in 1976. We've always been keen on planting trees, small patches here and there, corners of fields. And as Susie says, I trained as an accountant, and I've always been interested in what makes the profit of a farm, and really at the bottom line. And I began to realize quite early on that it was not just gross margin, it's what happens right down at the bottom of the line. And a lot of the farm was really not making any money. This came to light when set-asides came in, and we decided to take out the headlands, because I began to realize that the yield of the headlands actually let down the rest of the fields enormously. And therefore, actually planting trees on a lot of the places in the farm, this is a pretty best grade 3 bits, but a lot of grade 3Bs and a lot of grade 4. And its real value, it's an amenity farm. It's got a nice house, it's got lots of woods, and it's got rolling hills. And the amenity value was enormous. in this farm. Therefore, planting trees made it attractive and a nice place to live, not just pure farming. When the price of timber started to increase, timber prices started going up, and basic payments scheme money started going down, and therefore it became even more important to look at alternative sources of income. And the woods side came into focus. I had really ignored our ancient woods. We've got 3 quite large ancient woods on the farm, and I really basically ignored looking after them because it was so unprofitable. And then when the price of timber went down, it became impossible to do it without much cost attached to it. And then, of course, the great push on woodland creation made it attractive to plant new trees, new plantations. And this last year, year before last, we planted 3 little woods, one named after each of my daughters. And we could do that actually, considering the amenity value of it, and I believe the enhancement to the value of the estate as a whole. I think it was really done wisely and with very little cash. And it was a tremendous advantage to be doing that. The Forestry Commission, the advice I got from them was excellent, really excellent. And their advisor in my area was so helpful because, frankly, I'm not trained in agriculture at all. I never went to agriculture college. The only training I got was the Worship Company of Farmers Management course and what my wise and good clients told me. That's how I've learnt my farming. And it's I don't know a lot about trees, but the advice I've had from lately the Forestry Commission has been exemplary and well worth it.
Good, thanks very much, Vincent. Just ask quickly, what was that advice all free?
Well, as a taxpayer, no, but yes, it was. It was free out of that pocket.
Free at the point of that it was given. Thank you. Right, so we will move next. We'll hear a bit more about Vincent's operation later, but we'll move next to Anna Brown, Director of Forest Services with the Forestry Commission. Thanks.
Many thanks, Susie, and Vincent. Many thanks for a positive feedback as well. So I've worked in forestry for around 30 years, as Susie said, right across the landscape. So I've sort of worked from on the ground through, spent quite a long time in research, about half my career in research, and then moved really across into that policy operational landscape because I wanted to see the good research that was being done actually being put into practice on the ground and make sure that it was followed through. So really for the last sort of 10 so years, I've been working in that sort of policy operational landscape. Last couple of years, I've been Director of Forest Services. I probably joined this job at the most exciting time for forestry in my career that I can remember. We are basically a country of lumberjacks. We have been absolutely fantastic at felling trees for the previous sort of 300-500 years. To the point we were right down to 5% woodland cover, the lowest woodland cover within Europe. So really quite poor woodland cover. Very good at felling them, not very good at planting them. That's basically been our issue. The Forestry Commission was set up in 2019, as some of you might know, and that really was set up with that remit to actually build back up that strategic timber reserve. So we talk about food security, which is really, really important, but we also need to think about timber security as well. So for me, timber security, we import 80% of the timber that we use. So trees provide us lots of things, but if you look around the building you're in now, I can guarantee you there'll be quite a lot of wood. So that's where my kind of interest lies, I suppose. So what I do now is really being responsible for what I call carrots and sticks. So that's regulation and grants, and providing advice. And I've got a fantastic team with people like Sebanet who can really provide you with that on-the-ground experience and advice. Thank you.
Good, thanks very much, Anna. And yeah, we'll hear from some of that team now. So we've got Seb Ty, Field Manager, Woodland Creation with the Forestry Commission next up. Seb.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Susie. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Vincent. So I've been a part of the Forest Services team in the East and East Midlands since June 2021. And my job really is to look at large woodland creation schemes, so schemes above 5 hectares in size. And I help manage the grant, the Woodland Creation Planning Grant, which we'll hear about a bit later. So I look at the kind of the scoping and the viability of new woodlands, with particular kind of reference to kind of constraints on the ground. I also promote woodland creation in kind of all that I do in my job. My job is to encourage people to plant woodlands, and whether that's one tree or whether it's a million trees, I don't really care. So my sort of main message I'd like to kind of leave you with today, if possible, is to make use of sort of the expertise on the ground through the Forest Services and our partners, such as Rob at the National Forest, but all the way across the UK or England rather, in the community forest networks, and take advantage of the grants that are available, and the expertise that's there to support you to apply and access those grants. I'm going to pass on to Rob now.
Yeah, okay, now it's you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Susie. So my name is Rob Cleaver. I'm the Forest Creation Manager with the National Forest Company. My main role is to help farmers and landowners use our grants to plant trees around the National Forest. I'm sure many of you don't know what the National Forest is or where it is, so I'll just give a very brief description of it. The National Forest covers 200 square miles of the Midlands, overlapping parts of East Staffordshire, South Derbyshire and Northwest Leicestershire, and was conceived 30 years ago as a new forest for the nation to transform the scarred mining landscape and to connect the ancient woodlands of Charnwood and Needwood. The National Forest Companies work with farmers, landowners and other partners to increase forest cover from 6% to well over 22% in the last 30 years. But at the heart of everything we do is the belief that the forest is more than just the trees and the woodlands. It's the people who live here, the businesses and farmers that provide employment and food, the attractions that draw in visitors, and the open space and habitats that are vital for wildlife and well-being. Given that definition of the forest, we offer a broad range of support, from professional advice on sustainable tourism accommodation, support for community groups, health checks for volunteer groups, to outdoor teaching training for schools and grants for art projects to try and engage with a wider variety of people around the forest. And given that long history of the forest and the wealth of acquired knowledge and resources, we're involved in many research projects. We're partners with the Midlands Forest Network, and we're leading on the delivery of the the new Forest for the Nation. And we really do champion trees and all of their benefits in all of their guises right across the UK. Thanks, Susie.
Great, thanks, Rob. The enthusiasm coming through there, and I'm sure, although Rob is Forestry Creation Manager for the National Forest Company, he's going to be involved in a lot of the sort of advice and answers tonight, because those apply. Some of them, many of them apply across the board. Good. So we will just talk to Vincent a little more now about his what you've done over the years. You mentioned the 3 smaller woods that you've just planted in the name of your 3 daughters, Vincent, but I think you've had bigger planting projects as well at Birkcombe. Yeah. Is that right?
Yes, I think since about 1976, we've planted about 43 hectares of wood, belts of woods, corners of fields, and And then we have a Jubilee wood, which we put in the Queen's Jubilee. That was the one in 2012. And so we've gradually done things all right from the beginning. We've taken advantage of all the grants that have been going where possible. And when the other advice, apart from the Forestry Commission, I've had recently is friendly land agents, of which I have a number of friends, and that helped me with the woodland creation. And Land App, I've been using Land App, the mapping system, a lot, and they have been running webinars. And there's so much free advice out there, anybody really wanting to get into it. Everybody, CLA, NFU, our local farming group, and this morning I attended a Forestry Commission webinar, not a webinar, live presentations for small groups going around Lincolnshire. Enormous amount going on there.
Good. Okay. So is there anything from the point of view of the people watching or listening to this, is there anything you would have done differently, perhaps particularly with your more recent planting?
Yes, I mean it's quite difficult. You have to be quite careful in siting the woods. I mean, we have, I have to admit, built one or two small areas which we thought would be ideal for shooting game. Actually, they turned out to be a total disaster because they're extremely difficult to drive and things. And it's really, you need just to take a breath when you've got put it down on paper. And I know there are a lot of temptations to put these trees in certain places these days because you get paid extra money if you put them in certain places. But just think about it and say, well, it's not just the money. Is it the right place for visually? And it's going to affect things. So one of the places you put the things in the wrong place. One or two, obviously in hindsight, planted some of the wrong trees because of some were ash. Ash was very popular when we did a lot of our belts. That's not been a great success. But when you look at percentages, it's those sort of things. But generally, no, I don't regret having done any of it.
Good. That's good to hear. Right, so we'll go straight. We are getting questions coming in all the time, and we will try and get to some of those, but we'll go straight to some of our questions submitted in advance of the webinar to start with. And the first one I think is for you, Anna, in terms of people wanting to take land out of countryside stewardship, in this case higher tier, to go into UCO. We'll refer to UCO a few times, the English Woodland Creation Offer, which you might want to say a little bit about to start with, Anna, to put that in context. But the question is, beware of the process of extracting land from countryside stewardship higher tier for UCO. It took the person asking the question 2.5 years, starting with the Forestry Commission, moving to UCO to secure a grant to extend 2 ancient woodlands. It was a bit of an administrative nightmare and still is. The RPA imposed fines and didn't understand apparently that the woodland parcels had been earmarked, but the grant hadn't been awarded. So countryside stewardship payments stopped and the person was fined, and then a special advisor was allocated by RPA to sort it all out and push the grants through. So bit of a warning there. I think things have perhaps speeded up a bit with experience since that person's experience, but over to you, Anna, to just sort of explain that process. Are you still with us, Anna? If not, we'll go to someone else while Anna gets sorted out. Okay, so while that's happening, perhaps we can go to Seb. We've got a couple of questions about how to plan tree planting for very wide species diversity given climate change challenge, And sort of linked to that, how do people identify the best species for their farm, the ones that will grow well? There's so many to choose from. So perhaps if we kick off with Seb there,
Sure.
and
yeah, no problem.
might be able to come in on some of that as well.
So the thing to point out here is that there are a number of tools available for landowners to decide what would be suitable for their farm. We have a tool called the Ecological Site Classification Tool, which is an online sort of portal, really, hosted by Forest Research, and it's essentially a map browser where you can drop your cursor on a map, and it will tell you what species would predominate on your field given the current climate conditions, but also more crucially, what will grow in your field in 2050 and in 2080. So it uses data that's modelled, so it's data that's stored for your farm on its soil moisture status, its soil nutrient status, and also a number of other factors, including kind of windiness or stoniness, and it produces a report, a PDF report of 70 suitable species that would suit your farm. Now, there are some that would be unsuitable, which show as kind of red on the report, but if you're showing kind of greens on your report, then it's looking sort of promising for those particular species. Now, the key with this is you have to establish whether the data that the program has for you is correct, and you have the option of making alterations to the program, so you can change soil moisture status, you can change soil nutrient status on the system, and it will give you a much better report. You also have the option to produce, rather than a report that produces a number of or a list of species, you have an option to report on forest development types, or FDTs, and that's about giving you a guidance or a template on a type of woodland or a type of forest type in combination with each other. So it's not just about providing a suitability of individual species. The report will actually give you options on mixtures of species. It's worth bearing in mind that the link for the ESC, or the Ecological Site Classification Tool, we can share along with a heap of other links that we'll be talking about this evening, and I'm sure Olivia and Susie will be able to circulate those out in due course. But something else to kind of point out, I think Rob might pick up on this, is also seeing what's growing locally, seeing what's growing in your neighbour's hedge and your neighbour's woodlands. You'll largely be steered by that in most instances. So the mixture of wanting to use the ESC, use that reporting tool, but also seeing what's happening locally. Rob, have you got anything else to
add? Yes. The Forest Research has a tree species database where you can read about the species that go into that ESC report. Also, the Woodland Trust have a tree species handbook, which is really easy to read, and you'll find lots of useful information in there. And there's Woodland Trust and Forestry Commission woodland creation guides. So if you do a bit of Googling, you will find some information to set you off sort of on the right track to begin with.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was going to mention that you obviously there's going to be a lot of schemes, grants, and acronyms mentioned probably, and we will try and share as many of those as possible following the webinar. So Anna, welcome back. We'll go to you now on that first question about getting land out of countryside stewardship and into UCO. Thanks.
Yeah, apologies for that. My computer froze. So yes, it was a problem. Totally acknowledge that early doors, particularly just after we launched the grant for UK and England Woodland Creation Offer. Have we covered at all what the creation offer is? Seb, sorry, I missed whether you said anything about that.
No,
not yet. No.
Okay, so probably worth everyone just understanding a little bit when we talk about that. So we talk about UCO and fly around, which is a really lazy thing to do. But we basically have two grants, I think, of real interest to people. One is something called the Woodland Creation Planning Grant. And this is a really good tool which allows people to to see if you know, if they want to go ahead with a woodland, it's got to be over a 5 hectare size, and this type of thing that Seb really gets his teeth into and delivers. But it's that tool that really allows you to work out where wood should go, what type of species. Some of those questions are really good if you're not that confident about forestry and the different ways forward for it. But it is more for the slightly larger schemes. In terms of UCO, it's basically a basic grant. So you get paid X amount capital grants for your trees and your shelters and your fencing and that kind of thing. And then on top of that, we have things called additional contributions. So this is when you've got additional environmental benefits. So it might be for flood reduction, it might be for wood quality, you might have public access in there, it might be close to towns and cities, which actually so more people can visit it. So there's this whole government ambition to have people within 15 minutes of a green space. So there's this different additional contributions that you can stack together to actually bring your amount up. But as Vincent rightly says, you've got to decide as a landowner or a tenant what it is you want. What are your objectives? What is the main thing you want? So that for me is always the key when you're planting wood. Going back to the question, so CSITO, which I know you guys will all be very well aware of, when originally you went into UCO, there were some problems early doors. Totally acknowledge that. We've now got an agreed amendment process in place with RPA, so that should not happen again. So you should be able to transfer really quite easily between the two, as long as everything still stacks up within the CS agreements. There's obviously always financial rigor that has to go in, but the issue that I think happened here has been sorted.
Good, that's good to hear. Thanks very much, Anna. Right, we've got quite a specific question now, probably for Rob to start with. Somebody would like to create a 1 hectare belt of woodland about 300 meters long, adjacent to a neighbour's existing mature woodland. The boundary to the existing wood includes the applicant's hedge and ditch, which they need access to for maintenance. Can they include both the hedge and access track as part of the overall woodland area? Can they erect a deer fence alongside the wood rather than on the far side of the hedge, as this would limit access? Is there an opportunity to create a natural self-setting woodland? So lots of questions in one there. Rob, we go to you on that one.
To get the best, thanks. To get the best specific advice for your scenario, speak to your local woodland officer or woodland creation officer or whoever's delivering grants in your area, and ask them if they'll come out to site, because seeing the actual details will help them give you the best advice. It is worth noting, though, that designed or integrated open ground is absolutely critical to schemes in terms of having the space to do the planting and to maintain the site and for future management operations. And this open ground can also help provide a much more varied habitat. So you ask about natural colonisation. That's a really good tool in the right place. It can have low capital costs, but can take longer to establish. So you really need to set out what your objectives are and then assess the site to see whether the ground conditions and the trees around you will deliver the woodland that you want within the timescales that you're interested in. There's a lot of information online about natural colonisation. There's a project called the Treescape Expansion through planting and natural colonisation. I can provide a link afterwards. They've been running some webinars about it. I know if you're interested in natural colonisation, their recorded webinars will be well worth viewing to gain some additional information.
Great.
Seb, is there anything to add?
Yeah, just echoing Rob, it's difficult to comment on individual schemes without seeing a map, but there's some general rules to follow under UCO, or the England Woodland Creation Offer. We generally accept an access track of between 3 and 5 meters on the periphery to manage existing features, in this case a hedgerow. But the open, a word of information really, but the open ground allowance shouldn't exceed 5% of the gross area of the scheme that size. So on the deer fence, again, this is something that could be discussed with the woodland. It would need to be justified. We don't want to be putting unnecessary materials into the environment. But if it's outside of the site boundary, we need to ensure that the correct permissions are in place to erect that fence, and also that it would remain there for the duration of the UCO agreement.
Yeah, and that open ground 5% maximum that you mentioned, would that include the track land as well?
So yeah, so there's what's called internal space, integral internal space, which is what we want for larger kind of compartments. But we understand that with a shelter belt such as that's kind of long and narrow, and if there's a expectation to manage a boundary, that would be included in the overall area. The overall area, yeah. Just a word on natural colonisation. So yeah, UCO will support England Woodland Creation Offer will support natural colonisation, sometimes referred to as natural regen. Obviously, they're slightly different, but for the purposes of the grant, we support both. And there needs to be a seed source of at least 2 valid or viable seed species next to the area you're looking to afforest, and that needs to be within 75 meters of the woodland. So ash is supported as a viable species, worth bearing in mind, because we want to support the establishment of resistant genotypes. So details on UCO natural regen available through the UCO grant manual and the UCO appendices.
Right. Just well, because we've had several references to UCO and obviously the grants from Anna and yourself. Would it be possible to just sort of give a ballpark figure for people who aren't familiar with it of the type of sums that we're talking about on UCO?
So UCO pays for the capital costs associated with establishing woodlands up to £10,200 per hectare, and that's for your tubes, your trees themselves, your fencing. And then there are additional payments, which Anna mentioned, that benefit wildlife or people or water quality. And those additionalities can be stacked up on a hectare by hectare basis. So if you're in the Goldilocks zone, so to speak, the area that's just right, you could realise up to £8,000 worth of additional payments for establishment as a one-off payment. There are additional payments for maintenance at £350 per hectare for 15 years. The maintenance payments have recently gone up. So that's the kind of gist of the grant. Also, it's stackable with other points of finance as well, through private finance or through kind of carbon sequestration, which we'll come on to shortly. But that's the kind of details of it. And worth bearing in mind also, we have partners that we're working with in the Woodland Trust and the Community Forest Network who have their own grants and their own systems for that. So certainly worth shopping around.
Yeah.
Seb, is it worth mentioning the prices around the Woodland Creation Planning Grant to give people an indication of what we can
okay.
do?
So the Creation Planning Grant's paid in 2 stages. The first stage is a desk exercise where you're looking to kind of scope in and out particular areas, and that's paid at £1,500. And then you get £150 per hectare at stage 2, minus the original £1,500. And the upper limit for the Woodland Creation Planning Grant is £30,500. Sorry, that's just recently gone up. There are links to these that we'll send around afterwards, so you don't have to kind of keep jotting them down. So I understand there's a lot of acronyms and figures being thrown around at the moment. So.
Thank you. That's just helpful to give people an idea, though. Thank you.
Sorry, Susie, you're just on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that, everybody. Right, another question for Seb. This is someone who planted 22 years ago a hectare of 25% oak, 35% ash, 10% larch, 5% holly, some birch, cherry and thorn as well. Unfortunately, the ash has been hit by ash dieback. The squirrels have had a go at the oaks. Phytophthora on the larch, meaning that only 20% of saplings are now healthy. What species should they choose to plant to keep it all healthy? Sounds like a fairly early experience with early 22 years ago, but very disappointing, obviously. So Seb, on that one, please, and then if Rob wants to add anything.
Yeah, obviously, very disappointing, but it's, I suppose, with every woodland creation scheme, there's an expectation that we're going to lose some of the trees that we plant. So that's part of the forestry process, and woodland creation is about replacing dead and dying trees, and we're encouraging people to do that. It seems like every species has its kind of sort of nemesis, and whether it's a pest, a pathogen, or a disease. But do look at the ESC, the Ecological Site Classification tool, as a guide for your species choices, and try to get on the top of the squirrels. They tend to squirrels tend to target stands between sort of 10 and 25 years old. You can apply for an FC approved woodland management plan, which means you can then access countryside stewardship, higher tier woodland management options. And for squirrel control, that's at £60 per hectare. But you need sort of buy-in from your neighbours if you're operating a small woodland to make sure that was still happening. Another thing you could do is think about the tree health grant, which is available via assessment from your woodland officer or from your tree health woodland officer, and that pays towards the cost of restocking diseased woodland. You could restock with provenance from further south. So in 50 or 60 years' time, our climate in the southeast of England, for example, is going to be more closely representative of northern and western France. So you could supplement local provenance with origins from 2 to 5 degrees latitude south, and with a matching tool that we can use, which can match your site with other areas of Europe, or indeed the Northwest Pacific, that have similar climate to you currently, but also with areas of Europe that currently have the same climate as your area, and is predicted to have in the future. So again, a useful tool, and we can share the link for that afterwards. Rob, have you got anything to add, being in the National Forest?
Yeah, so we have grants within the National Forest for squirrel damage assessment and control as well. And the squirrel damage assessment method was developed by my colleagues in the National Forest, and then it was rolled out nationally. On the UK Squirrel Accord website, there's a link to a webinar that will tell you about the squirrel damage assessment. And if you do follow the UK Squirrel Accord on their newsfeed or socials, you'll hopefully see if there's upcoming training events. So that's suitable for landowners and agents to find out more about using the squirrel damage assessment, which you will need to then give the evidence you need for your grant application for some squirrel control support. And it's really worth, as Seb says, speaking to your neighbours. It has to be a wider landscape effort. If you're a small woodland surrounded by other woodlands and it's only you doing control, I'm afraid you're fighting a losing battle at the moment.
Right.
It's got to be a group effort. Yeah.
Thanks both. Right. So now we've got a question from someone sort of at the other end of the scale, worried about getting it wrong in terms of putting trees in the wrong place, choosing the wrong species. I guess that comes back partly to some of the answers we've already heard about the tools that are available to help you choose the species. How long would it take to remove them? Well, if he's put them in the wrong place or changes his mind, how long would it take to remove them? I don't know whether this is linked to having received grants. It doesn't mention grants. How will trees affect the water flow and erosion on the land? Anna, I think that's one for you, probably.
Yeah, it's a very wide-ranging question.
It's an
interesting one. So I think I'll go back to some of the previous answer. We do have the Woodland Creation Planning Grant for the bigger woods, and that really it's like your taster session. So
sort of starting point.
It's a starting point, so it means you can map things out. Vincent, I think, mentioned the Land app. recently, so we did some nice work with the land app. It's definitely worth having a look at it because it just shows you more widely what you can do with your land, and tree planting is part of that. And it will show you, for instance, which of the additional contributions you may be able to get if you plant on a certain area of your land. It's a really interesting one because people quite often quote to me, right tree, right place. And my response is always UK Forest Standard. So we've got something called the Forest Standard. And actually, in terms of being the right thing, as long as you're following the Forest Standard, it won't be the wrong tree. It might be the wrong tree for you, but it won't be the wrong tree. So there's some really good guidance out there. And whether you're in National Forest or one of our other partners, or whether you're in the Forestry Commission, we've got lots of people who can advise you and help you to make sure that you get it right. In terms of water quality and erosion, trees are a really good thing. There is some fantastic work that's been done by colleagues at Forest Research. There's a really good project they did on slowing the flow of Pickering, and it really just shows how trees can play a really vital part in actually managing and flood mitigation. So I spend far too much of my life on trains, travelling to meetings and things, and the amount of, well, I always call them soggy bottoms, but the amount of wet field corners I see, and like flooding I'm seeing, and just landscapes denuded of trees. And there's just something here that if we had a few more trees in there, that would really help with some of that erosion and some of that runoff and that wash off. In terms of felling and runoff, you wouldn't really want to be felling them until they get to the age of thinning, which will be sort of 15 to 20 years old. That's normally when you'll be looking to start and remove things. Felling trees is really normal. It's part of good forest management. That's not a bad thing. But it does have to be done responsibly. So you don't want to be felling all your trees in a very steep woodland without using any protections, doing it at the wrong time of year, and then you will get runoff if you haven't done it properly. So again, that's having good forest management plans, which Seb mentioned earlier, and actually just making sure that you've got a good agent in the same way you would do if you wanted a agronomist to give you advice on your fields and your soils.
Mm-hmm. And I think fairly recently, sometime last year, there were new rules and penalties came in for felling without a license, which
that's right. So basically, we've got something called I think Vincent wants to come in. We've got something called a felling license. Those penalties come in for illegal felling. So you can legally fell a certain amount every quarter, every year. It's a small amount. It would be enough to run your wood burner, for instance, of a reasonable sized house. But you can't sort of fell huge swathes. There's a process that we go through, and actually, illegal felling is a bad thing because obviously that's denuding our countryside of trees as well, where it really shouldn't be happening. So we do have higher penalties now, so pretty much unlimited fines. I think Vince wanted to come in on this.
Did you want to come in on that?
Yes, just making a mistake. Several years ago now, I was encouraged to, my hedge cutter was extremely good at identifying sapling trees within hedges. And we put tags around them, and so we allowed them to grow, which is a lovely thing to do. Except we did that on the roadside hedges as well. So we had a lot of trees in our roadside hedges. 20 years later, 30, 25 years later, we have a lot of ash trees in our roadside hedges. The insurance company has insisted on us getting rid of them. It cost us £25,000 to take the roadside ashes out. Great expense. All because we were very environmentally positive in leaving these trees in the hedges. So it's a warning. Don't be too keen to leave trees in hedges.
I think trees and hedges, but maybe by roads. I will say for ash dieback, because that has been quite a phenomenal disease. I am a plant pathologist by training, so I can't help but respect it as a disease because it really has done an impressive number. But we do have pilot grants at the moment, and that's really looking at helping landowners, particularly along a stretch of woodland, work together. Because one of the big costs, as I understand it, Vincent, is actually the road closures, and having to work with the council to get road closures. And so we have these what I would call cooperation grants as part of that pilot to help people work together to make that a bit cheaper as well.
Good, thank you. It's obviously worth knowing about. We will move now to a question about somebody has some scrubby bits of woodland that need improvement, and they also want to create further woodland and perhaps even some woodland meadows. Are there grants available to cover all those aspects of woodland development? I think we're going to Seb first again on that one.
Yes, there are for all of those. So, in short, we're improving kind of the existing woodland management offer within Countryside Stewardship and the SFI. So one of those improvements is we're reducing the threshold for woodland management offers from 3 hectares to 0.5, half a hectare, and expanding the kind of the underpinning of that woodland management plan eligibility as well, to ensure that the payments kind of cover more of the costs incurred by woodland managers. Your question on scrubby bits, yep. So I'll point you to the table 12 in the new SFI technical annex, which was published in January. Again, there'll be a link to this, no doubt, provided at the end of the webinar. But now there are a number of options to ensure that any woodland is brought into sustainable management in line with the UK Forest Standard. So in addition, there are new capital items for wildfire management, for restocking, for coppice and ride creation, and for woodland creation. Of course, we've spoken a bit about UCO. We spoke a bit about the woodland creation planning grant. There are within the community forests a number of options for you to create woodlands, and through the Woodland Trust offer as well. And yes, your question on woodland meadows, wood pasture is an option under Countryside Stewardship SFI for the creation of wood pasture. So I'd refer you to table 13 on the technical annex, which is about the creation and management of existing wood pasture, and existing capital items will continue to be available for wood pasture. So that's, for example, protection for trees and the action of planting trees. So, yeah, in answer to your question, yes.
Okay, thank you. And following on from that, we've got a sort of linked question about short rotation coppice. You mentioned coppice. Somebody wants to know whether grants and support are available for short rotation coppice or pollard to be used as animal fodder. I don't know how common that is, but perhaps Seb, and then maybe
I had to have a bit of a dig around for this one, but essentially, UCO, or the England Woodland Creation Offer, doesn't. It's a creation grant, so we want to plant a woodland, and it doesn't support the creation of short rotation coppice.
Okay.
It doesn't support the creation of Christmas trees plantations, nor does it support cricketback willow. So there are a number of.
So basically, if the plan is to harvest it, it's not going to be funded by UK.
Exactly. What you do in your maintenance and your management in line with a woodland planning or other woodland management grant is up to you. So you could take material out as part of your thinning process, and what you do with that is up to you. I suppose you could feed it, you could use it as bedding, I suppose, in some cases, but there's no kind of out and out grant for short rotation that I'm aware of. I don't know if anyone else can chip in.
Rob, have you got anything to add to that one?
Yeah, so in the National Forest, we wouldn't support a short rotation coppice of willow. If somebody was looking at planting a silver pasture scheme where the trees would be there to provide shade and shelter for the livestock, and then pollarded above browsing height to provide fodder or as a product to sell, we would be able to support that. I think we could do that with our grants.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Good.
Just on the previous question about the wood pasture, sorry to jump in. One of the discussions or presentations at the agroforestry show was about wood meadows. So all of the sessions from the agroforestry show were recorded and available online. If you're interested in wood meadows, it'd be well worth just having a quick look at that. Delivered by a specialist from the plant life. Very interesting and a good place to start if that's your thing.
Great, thank you, thanks. Right, so this is a short question, but it's a big question. And you could probably come at it from lots of angles. How do you make planting trees cost effective for a farm? Anna, I think we'll go to you, but Vincent might have something to add on that one. You're on mute, Anna. Okay, well, perhaps while Anna gets sorted out, we'll go to Vincent.
Yes, so it's a question of what do you mean by cost effective?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're hoping to make a profitable income out of planting woodland creation, I'm not sure, although the price of timber has gone up enormously. But of course, it's a far bigger subject than that. It's the capital cost of the estate or the farm that you've got on it, making it more attractive. It's the cost of improving the wildlife. Biodiversity net gain has been coming in quite seriously, but I'm a bit nervous about that. I'm tying it up for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
not knowing at the moment, not knowing the tax consequences of doing that.
Yeah, exactly. I think I personally, it's although I'm an accountant, I don't think it's purely money financial, and it's a lot more to it than that. And if you enjoy the thing, you enjoy the countryside, it's more than cost effective. It's a no-brainer as well. I think so.
Thank you, Vincent. Anna, I think you're back with us now on that cost-effective question.
Apologies, my computer mouse does not want to play. I think Vincent actually hit a nail on the head. It is very complicated, and it really depends on what else you could have put there and what the value of that is. So there is that income foregone calculations you've got to do. But I actually think there are lots of ways that you can make it cost effective. You get your capital grants, you get your 15 years maintenance payments. I think for me, and sorry Vincent if I missed this, something that is key is carbon. So at the moment, carbon markets are quite, I would say, immature. They're quite nascent generally. Woodland Carbon Code is the most mature nature market we've got. So we've got a really good standard for that, and it's very well recognised. And I think that has got the opportunity. You can sell your carbon credits up front. I actually think unless you really need the money, that probably isn't the wisest thing to do, because the carbon market prices are only going to head in one direction, and that's upwards. So that can actually give you a guarantee of a longer term income through carbon. So I think there's some really bits. I also think, and again, Vincent, apologies if you covered this, there's so much more to it. So what is the financial? You've got the financial monetary value, you've got the landscape value, you've got the amenity value, but you've also got things like improved conditions for your livestock. It can provide shade and everything else. Flooding we've talked about, that there is water quality. There's so many other things that actually will save you money in other ways through planting trees. So it's kind of bigger than that cash cost, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Vincent, yes.
Just a quick one on the carbon credits. I think when the farmers get subject to net zero, you want to be very cheery about selling your carbon credits, because I think we're going to need every carbon credit we can get. Once you put fertilizer and diesel into your carbon balance, you will find you're going to be terribly short of credits.
Yeah,
I don't disagree with you, Vincent.
Good point. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we now have a sort of three-part question, probably to start with Seb. Although it may well be outside the scope of this panel. What are the impacts of tree planting to the classification of land as a farm? And how does it impact inheritance under current legislation? I guess that really goes to whether it's a farm becomes a wood or a forest, or whether the planting is incidental to the overall area. Seb, can you guide us on that one?
Yeah, a bit of a dodge on this one, I'm afraid, but I'd always refer questions on land classifications to a financial advisor or a farm advisor, and as government employees, we can't provide that advice to you.
Yeah.
there is guidance for tax implications on gov.uk, but we'd always ask you to make these. If you're making big decisions, you need somebody in the room to help you make that decision, and an advisor would be advisable, if that makes sense.
I'll just add, I think CLA also produced a really nice explanation about tax as well within forestry. We just have to be a little bit careful because we can't give you financial advice.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. This one is linked to the question just earlier about can small-scale tree planting of less than a hectare be economically viable for carbon capture credits because of the costs of registration and inspection, and with the proviso that Vincent just gave about be very careful what you do with your carbon. That is pretty small scale. So is it worth it if you are considering entering that market?
So there are two things to consider with this, because if you've got a small scheme, to make the project validation and verification cost cheaper. One is to register your new woodland with the Woodland Carbon Code, which is free to do, but you submit it as what's called a small project. So that's anything under 5 hectares in size, because the verifications are simpler and cheaper.
Right.
And the second point is you can group your project with others and validate them and verify them together. So you can have up to 15 standard projects plus 50 hectares of small projects together in a single group with one validation and one verification cost. So the details on that are on the Woodland Carbon Code website, which we can share afterwards.
Thank you. And again, linked to that and on carbon, do the grants on offer allow the landowner to sell carbon credits, or are these allocated to the grant funder? I think that's a fairly straightforward answer to that one, Seb.
So you can keep the credits. You can sell them privately. You can sell them to the government through the Woodland Carbon Guarantee at a fixed price.
There's no link with the grant funding, or it doesn't commit you to. They're still your carbon credits essentially to sell or not.
They're yours to sell. That's correct. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. One for Anna now. Somebody planted 20 years ago. They planted about 50 acres of deciduous woodland, including some Scotch pine. Is there any way they can utilise those trees for carbon capture? Again, another carbon question.
I mean, my slightly flippant answer is they're already capturing carbon. So they're doing the right thing, they're doing the good thing. But I think probably the question is more about, can they be used for credits?
Yes.
And no, the answer is you can only register before you plant. So you basically, it's at that time of planting for a new planting scheme. However, and this will be a time game, and I don't know how it will work or whether it will happen, there's quite a lot of work going on in the background looking at embedded carbon. So this is the idea that obviously carbon that's in your buildings and your doors and in your wall carcasses and everything else, carbon that gets locked up, how we actually measure that. So whether at some point much further down the line we end up with some kind of carbon credits for embedded carbon, I don't know, but it might be something that develops over time.
Okay, thank you. Lots of questions here. For Rob, this one, what are the benefits environmentally of evergreen trees over deciduous trees?
Thanks, Susie. Well, I think we should consider what are the benefits of evergreen trees in addition to deciduous trees. Conifers have got so many benefits. I'll run through a few. They can be easy to establish, reliably grow good timber, which is going to sequester and lock up carbon. Goshawks like living in dense conifers. Red squirrels love to live in Scots pine and eat Norway spruce. Dense cypress needles can house a large number of insects, which attracts birds. I could go on with a big list of good reasons for conifers. If you're trying to decide what to plant yourself, start with your vision, identify your objectives, and then review the constraints of your site, and that will guide you to which trees are going to deliver your objectives. it's likely to be a broad range of species and a broad range of tree types. So I think you need to look at it from the other side, objectives, constraints, and then you'll figure out what trees are going to work for you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Just going to jump in with a question that's come in during the session, which is, where should people look for advice on smaller woodland parcels? We have got quite a lot of questions on small woodland, and obviously they haven't specified how small, but I think a lot of the funding on offer does cover quite small areas. So could one of you, not sure who would go to first on that, Rob?
I'll just go very quickly. Well, our woodland creation grants within the National Forest are for schemes down to 1/4 of a hectare, and that 1/4 of a hectare could include 2 or 3 small blocks. Nationally, I think Seb, you'll comment on that. It's slightly different.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to Seb now then. Thanks, Seb.
Yeah, so the minimum threshold for UCO is 1 hectare in total, but that can be split down into 0.1 hectare blocks. So you could have 10.1 hectare blocks if you wanted to.
All right. Okay.
It would make up one application
altogether. Yeah. And what
Would
about
it-
outside UCO? Is there anything else?
Yeah, so the Woodland Trust have their More Woods scheme, a More Hedges scheme.
Yeah.
And without wanting to run through every single community woodland threshold, there'll be provision for small blocks, i.e. less than a hectare, for grant funding, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, we've got quite a few questions on very similar lines coming in during the session. Another one is, are there any grants for regeneration?
So I don't know if this is a natural regeneration question, or whether it's kind of regenerating existing woodland. In which case,
sorry, it's for replanting existing woodland. My mistake. Sorry.
Yeah. So that would, that's accessible through countryside stewardship options. Absolutely. So yeah, I'd refer you to the table or the technical annex coming through.
Right. Thank you.
Starting in January.
Right. We've also got quite a lot of questions on agroforestry. Somebody wants to know about where can they get to know more about agroforestry tree species. Might come back to things you've already mentioned, but agroforestry in particular, Rob or Seb.
Yeah, I'll kick this off if that's all right. As I mentioned before, the UK's first agroforestry show was held in September. You can go back and watch the recordings of all the sessions and actually hear from, not just from experts, but on the farmers who have delivered schemes, and find out about their experiences, what worked for them, what didn't. In May this year will be the 4th agroforestry open weekend, where you'll be able to go and see what farmers have done, and they can talk you through their experiences. Lots of case studies in the Soil Association Agroforestry Handbook. There's a Land Workers Alliance of a case study document. So there's lots of information out there. We can provide links to that. But also Forestry Commission and Woodland Trust agroforestry advisors and local community woodland advisors can all help you with that.
Great, thank you very much. Obviously lots of options, lots of opportunities. Anna, another carbon question now. This person signed up to plant 5,000 plus trees on 2 fields with a local group. Or a local initiative. How do they go about selling the carbon before the trees are planted? Again, back to carbon, but with all the caveats that we've already heard about being careful about.
Why would you want to do that? About setting it for front. So, I mean, the first thing you need to do is register with Woodland Carbon Code. And then once it's registered, and it does need to be planted, I think, although I'd have to double check that, if you go onto their website, you'll see there is a whole array of people who can sell those carbon credits for you, who basically act as brokers. Right. So the projects are checked. It depends how you're selling it as well, whether you're going to sell them all up front, what they basically PIUs they're called. So it's basically before those trees have grown, or whether you sell it a bit later down the line. But there are companies who can do it. So just go to the Woodland Carbon Code website and it will link you into the people who will act for you on that behalf.
Okay, thank you. And another one for Anna, which is, are there any grant schemes for hedgerow creation and the fencing that might be needed to go along with that?
So yes, and I might Rob might want to add to this. The ones I'm aware of, Natural England RPA have a grant for hedgerow creation and fencing as well within the CS capital grants. Woodland Trust also have hedgerow grants, and there probably are others. I'm pretty certain that some of the other small community ones also do hedgerows as well, but they're both nodding.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Pretty certain National Forest does and other ones as well.
Another fairly broad question for Anna. What options are available to maximise revenue from existing woodland? And I guess that comes across both grants, use of the woodland, and any production from it.
So I think the first thing you need to do is make sure you've got a decent management plan, and there are grants available to get that management plan in place, depending on what species it is and what age it is. Squirrel control, absolute definite. We've touched on that a bit earlier. Deer control as well. There's grants to help you with deer control. Both of those, again, really good to do at a landscape scale. So working with your neighbours if you want to be really effective. Because what you want to do is, if you're trying to get timber out of it, particularly is having that higher quality tree that hasn't been munched and nibbled by various things, a bit like your crops, agricultural crops as well. In terms of harvesting, I've had some really interesting discussions recently. There was a great chap who was working in the West Midlands, who was working through the farm clusters, and he was basically helping them with harvesting operations. So say if they've got 5 landowners, they've all got maybe 5 or 10 hectares, relatively small parcels across the landscape. And he was actually working out felling plans across the landscape. So he would literally go from one to another, so they'd get the maximum money for those felling parcels. So I think there is ways of working through your farm clusters and others to actually find some good contractors who can actually help you maximise your revenue. But I'm happy to have a chat with people about that if that helps.
Just on contractors, somebody's actually asked a question during the session about how can you ensure that your forestry or woodland contractor is appropriately qualified, experienced, insured? I mean, is there an overall scheme to give people some reassurance on that?
So it's interesting at what level you're working, but we obviously have the Institute of Chartered Foresters. So similar to chartered land managers. So I think that would be my starter for 10 always, in terms of, are people chartered or are their businesses chartered? So are they kind of working as a sort of a responsible business? Seb, are there other things you'd like to add on that one in terms of contractors?
Yeah, there's obviously, Lantra training courses. You could request, documentation from people to see if they've got the necessary qualifications. But a lot of the time, the agents will be working with contractors. That there'll be good links and relationships between those contractors and the agents. But yeah, I suppose there's no safeguard that we would. Then there's no safeguard that exists through the UCO to ensure that a contractor is operating effectively.
So there's no sort of recommended list or anything like that. It's just, Rob, yeah.
Yeah, it might be worth having a look at the Forestry Industry Safety Accord, FISA. You might be able to get some advice there on how to make sure that your contractors are suitably trained and qualified.
Okay, thank you. But Vincent, you wanted to come in on that one, I think, as well.
Yes, quite an important point when it comes to thinning some of these new plantations and everything. Very tempting just to say to the contractor, you thin them all, you keep the timber. Or he might say, well, I'll give you £10 a ton for the timber. Got to be terribly careful to make sure that the right trees are thinned.
Yeah.
As you say, I'm not a tree person, but you need to have somebody who understands which of the trees that should be thinned and which trees should be left.
Yeah, thank you.
Then when they start, to make sure they're abiding by it, because once you put the on the tree and it's gone, you don't know whether they've taken which one.
Rob, did you want to come back in on that one?
Just on Vincent's point there, find yourself a forestry agent that you have confidence in, and they should be able to do all of that for you. Obviously, there's a charge to that, but then you make sure you get the work done right, and that they'll sell the timber on your behalf at the best price they can get.
Right, thank you. We've just got about 5 or 6 minutes to go, so we might be able to fit some more questions in, but just wanted to ask Rob? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it was just about the deriving revenue from woodland, because you can get revenue that isn't timber, that isn't carbon. If it's not age for harvesting, we've come across people who are looking for woodlands to train gun dogs in, or woodlands for archery activities. So there might be groups out there who'd be interested in renting your woodlands for you, either before you're looking at thinning or felling, or in between your management, and there could be ongoing additional revenue. So it's worth having a look around and seeing what activities there are in your area.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I wanted to, just before we finish, and apologies because we haven't got near all of the questions, but we will be following up some of the themes in some of the questions that we didn't get to. We've had a few about orchards, fruit trees, and there's very small planting schemes. So we will try and cover some of those in Farmers Weekly in future features, because there's obviously a huge amount of interest, agroforestry questions as well. So before we finish, I wanted to ask each of the panel, if they want to give a top tip or a couple of top tips in terms of looking at woodland creation. We'll start with Rob, and then go to Seb, then Vincent and Anna.
Yeah, okay. So my top tip comes in 3 parts. Start with your clear objectives. Everything comes from that. Do as much due diligence as you can. We'll provide links in the follow-up email to this event so you can understand the constraints, and start your conversations early with your grant provider and stakeholders. Whoever your grant provider is, whoever your stakeholders are, understand what the potential is and what the constraints might be, so you don't waste time going down a thorough design and costing to have to undo it.
Okay. Right, thank you. Thanks, Rob. Seb?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. My top tip would be, come speak to us at the earliest opportunity. We're within Forest Services. We're geared up to support as many applications as we can, and there's no time like the present. We have to kind of act now with these grants. The grants are there to be used, so let's use them.
Thank you. Vincent?
Yes, definitely get the best advice, where it's come from. See what other people are doing. It's always better to be the second person involved in these things than the first. See the mistakes they make. Make sure you've got a good provider of the trees. They're a very useful source of advice. We have a marvelous person in our part. I think the other thing I just wanted to end by saying is that I've benefited from the inheritance of what other people have done with the trees on my land. My brother was keen on doing trees. I wasn't so keen. My farm manager was very keen on doing trees. I wasn't so keen. As soon as the finances turned around a bit, I became more keen. But I have benefited from the benefit that they have done, and I hope we, by planting now, can benefit the next generation.
Right, thank you. Anna?
I'm going to end up and badly muller a quote which goes something along the lines of, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is 20 years ago. So when's the second best time to plant a tree? And that's today. So, and I truly believe it will give really good benefits to all landowners. I don't really see things as farming and forestry as land management. And I think it's just all part of that package that will make your farming better, and it will make your whole land management package better.
Yeah. All right, thank you. We have got 2 more minutes, so I'll thank the panel very much for their time. Thanks to everyone for attending. We've covered a lot of ground, as I said at the beginning, I expected to. There's obviously more to go at, and we do have one more question we've had 2 questions about re-establishing trees in parkland where they perhaps haven't been managed too well. And we're probably going to run out of time, but if anybody wants a quick word on that, I'm not sure who would be best to go to on that.
Check out the Technical Alex, the SFI, with reference to Table 13, which is all about wood pasture restoration and establishment.
Thank you. Right. I think we are almost out of time now. So again, apologies to those whose questions we didn't get to. We will try and cover some of that ground in Farmers Weekly, and do use the advice that you've heard about. Most of it is free, and it's there to be had. So there's obviously a lot of interest in this whole area, and I expect we do this webinar in a year's time and we'll have a lot more trees already. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.